Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.11 ADC tier list. So, if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes affecting the ADC role this patch. Obviously we saw the nerfs towards Collector and IE being pretty impactful, dragging down some of the top tier marksmen, which were overperforming. Essence Reaver had its cost reduced by 100, and combined with a couple of other changes, Static Shiv, yeah, things have shifted about, and we will see a couple of things move in the tier list. So, let's get into it. To remove, Smolder is no longer in the D tier. I, in fact, only have one champion in the D tier, that is Ezreal. He is being buffed pretty heavily in 14.12, but for the moment, he stays within the D tier. He was one of the biggest losers of 14.10. He really valued Essence Reaver as an item, being forced to move over to Trinity when most of his other items were just underperforming as well. Felt really bad. He's obviously not doing very well at the moment. I believe the way they want to go with Ezreal is having him as being a relatively strong mid-game caster ADC and trying to kind of fit that profile. Right now, he's kind of lackluster across the board. When he's really impressive early game, he tends to be a bit too strong in pro play. And I imagine they won't want to take that route. Obviously, we're seeing that he's getting some AD growth, some AD ratios. But for the moment, he's underperforming. He is within the D tier. Moving into the C tier, we have Smolder. Obviously, got buffed this patch pretty heavily. It's not quite enough to push him further up the tier list, but he's definitely in a more comfortable spot. You're no longer griefing by playing this champion. Obviously, he got hotfix buffed and then buffed in the most recent patch. The builds are still going to be things like, like you can go Trinity. Obviously, you do value Sheen quite heavily on this champion, but there are crit variations. Obviously, they buffed the crit ratio on his Q, and it's a case of figuring out what works for you, what works within that game, whether you want a bit more durability, whether you want the upfront damage. There's options there. He's a solid C tier option. Varus and Kalista go alongside him. Obviously, these two champions are incredibly pro-bound at the moment. Lethality Varus combined with on-hit, but then it's primarily just Lethality Kalista as well. However, her on-hit variation does tend to see a bit more play. They are mostly just, these champions are locked to pro play at the moment. I really would not recommend playing them in mid-elo. They are more, they technically require more out of you within early laning phase to really get a huge amount of value, require a bit more setup, a bit more coordination when you're playing these two champions. If you're not as synergistic with your team, you're going to struggle a bit more, and that really punishes them, so they sit within the C tier. Thaddeus, a very hard marksman to play. It's actually, well, was decent in 14.10 with IE and Collector obviously overperforming. These items being nerfed have definitely hurt him, as he was one of the core users of them. He once again sits towards the back end of the C tier. They don't want him, if he's strong within mid-elo, then he's probably oppressive within pro play. That is the concern with a champion like this, so he belongs within the C tier. Kaiser's doing a bit better, however, she still kind of sits towards the top of the C tier. Honestly, I'll actually push Kaiser up to the B tier. I'll talk about her in a second, but Yasuo is going to wrap up the C tier. You know, Yasuo and Draven. So Yasuo is in the C tier. He's obviously underperforming. Velocity's lethal tempo did a decent amount to hurt him. He still tends to be pretty good into a lot of the marksman options though at the moment. Obviously Yasuo does or has historically operated pretty well as a champion here, better than he has in mid and top lane. The Windwall has a lot of value. You tend to be pretty durable with your passive if you can rotate it a lot of times into trading patterns. It's not doing too well at the moment. Fleet is the keystone I'd recommend. And then you have like options like Phantom, IE, Bork possibly is like a starter, right, like as your first item, but he still isn't performing great. He sits within the C tier. And then Draven and Senna, I've dropped down from my B tier. So Senna, obviously, one of the bigger losers of crit items being a bit stronger. She doesn't tend to operate so well on them compared to some of the lethality options, which she does usually go. Your opportunity does still go RFC second, and then you can go crit variations or lethality variations. We did in the past see primarily lethality. Have a crit to scale a bit better, so that is an option there, but she's still underperforming. She belongs in the C tier. Draven got nerfed in 14.10b, buffed up in the most recent patch, but he's still down from where he was. The changes weren't enough to really push him back up. after the hotfix. In fact, I dropped him down after the hotfix on B to C. So yeah, this champion's underperforming at the moment. Obviously, an incredibly elite skewed pick, very reliant on his early game aggression, and that is where he finds a lot of his strength. Moving on to the beta, obviously Kaiser is here. She is a bit better this patch. Does have options. I would recommend defaulting primarily on your Kraken, Ginsu, Nash's variant. That tends to be where most of her like strength lies at the moment. Static is on the rise, but it's still not really found its mark on this champion. Siva's the three champions which are like really going static as core options are Kaiser, Siva, and Zeri. Zeri is the main one, like the outlier of like it's actually really good on Zeri at the moment. Zeri has been moved up to my beta. She can sit alongside Kaiser here. She's doing a lot better at the moment. Obviously synergistic with the likes of Yumi, but you can work with a lot of combos. This pick isn't bound to anything by any means. Barrier is something I'd actually recommend on most marksmen at the moment. It's really slept on. This summon as well is really good. Ghost obviously underperforming after it was pretty heavily nerfed. However, heal is still an option if you're looking for a bit more durability in lane alongside your laning partner. Siva is going to be within my B tier. So Siva does have some options and builds. This would be the likes of First Strike, PTA, even Airy. I've seen some people go. I do recommend First Strike. I actually played a game recently of First Strike Siva, and you can really feel the power of it. Obviously, it is being nerfed in 14.12, so I believe you will go back to running the likes of PTA. That should operate a bit better on this champion. But at the moment, you have really easy access to First Strike Gold. If you're bouncing a W off the wave and it hits one of the opponents, then you can get a lot of First Strike money and value out of it early on. And then you can run the likes of Cashback. Not usually magical footwear, as you do tend to want boots fairly early on. And then you can go like standard crit variations or like flex items, but yeah, it's primarily just crit variations. You can go your Kraken Slayer, and then like your Phantom, your IE, BT, pretty good late item on this champion. LDR, also quite nice into heavily armored picks. But yeah, Siva, doing decently. A relatively easy to play B tier pick. Vayne also going to be within my B tier, so Vayne has lost a bit of power, obviously valued lethal tempo quite heavily. However, she does have other keystone options, so she wasn't like bound to it by any means. PTA, Fleet do work quite nicely in this pick. There are on-hit variations, but you can also go like crit variations. Champion isn't dead by any means. You can still carry games on this pick. It's just not as easy to pilot as it was last split when she was overpowered. Obviously, Q got nerfed, the passive movement speed got nerfed, makes her less safe. Did value Ghost, so she has lost a bit of power there. She now sits within the B tier. Tristana, also going to be my B tier. A bit more combo reliant, honestly. Seems to have a deceptively strong pairing with Yumi. Both actually Tristana and Lucian have a very strong pairing with that champion. Obviously Yumi being buffed in 14.12, so that is something to be aware of. However, she does tend to value engage. If you can set up like good early game combos, get a lot of stacks on your E, and kind of snowball throughout the game, be really powerful on this pick. She has a lot of mobility with her W, obviously, and yeah, it can be a really solid option. Not as strong as some of the other picks within the A and S tier, but definitely a solid option nonetheless. Corki is also with my B tier. So Corki is, well, I mean, Corki's really strong in an elite play. Like, he's actually one of the more oppressive picks there at the moment in both mid and in the bot lane. For more casual play, or for more mid elo, low elo focused, this pick doesn't quite have the same level of strength. Obviously, early game aggression is an incredibly elite skewed thing. When he is more early game aggressive than even the likes of Draven and Kalista, he tends to go Emax, run Halo Blades, you're going like lethality variants, then yes, Corki is very elite skewed. But there are build options which can work. Obviously, crit does scale a bit better than lethality, but if you're going like opportunity, hubris, like some flex options in amongst there, then yeah, Corki can pack a punch. He does a huge amount of damage with his R if you are snowballing. A really solid B tier pick. If you put the games in, you should find a decent amount of success on this pick. Lucian isn't a bad champion by any means. He obviously got buffed this patch by Nami being buffed, so he indirectly gets buffed. His builds are still relatively fine. Obviously, you have like the Kraken, you have the Flicker Blades as an option. Collector, i.e., is still like a strong pair of items you can start on it as well. There are options here. Lucian, very solid BT pick. Sivir's other item is actually Flicker Blades. I forgot to mention this. Sivir is really good at abusing that item at the moment. Tends to be something like Kraken into Flicker Blades. But yeah, Lucian, solid option. Also, once again, tends to be a bit more combo reliant. If you can like cycle out the passive a lot, then he can output a huge amount of damage. And obviously, as it's magic, it can be quite hard to itemize against. Lucian, a very solid B tier pick. Nyla, kind of underperforming at the moment. She probably sits towards the low end of the B tier. If we put Zeri up a bit, Nyla probably sits towards the back end of this tier. Obviously getting buffed in 14.12, but for the moment, lost a bit of power with both Collector and IE being nerfed. Combined with some nerfs she received at the end of last bit, she now sits at the back of the B tier. Korgmore isn't in that bad of a spot at the moment. Once again, the B tier is like none of these champions are particularly bad. They're just not as strong as some of the other options, which I have higher up in my tier list. Kog'Maw once again marks some PTA quite nicely. Ginsu's is still a great item on this pick. I believe you can kind of flex in a Bork if you do want that as like a first item option into health stackers. But there are different variations you can play of Kog'Maw, but it tends to be pretty on hit bound. You can't really flex much out of that. There are some AP variants, but I believe they mostly tend to be bound towards mid lane. However, I have seen some people discuss them, so that could be something to look into if you really do enjoy playing Kog'Maw. We have two mages to wrap up the beta, so both Veigar and Ziggs are pretty solid AP options if you're looking for something which can do a decent amount of damage. You want a bit more control, Veigar's there. If you want a bit more siege potential, Ziggs is there. Both these picks very solid, have good range, very deserving of like high tier B spots. And then Samira is going to get brought down. Samira lost a bit of power obviously with her with the B patch in 14.10. The nerfs towards IE and Collector kind of just pushed her even further down, so she now sits at the back end of the beta. The beta very stacked at the moment. There are lots of champions here, obviously. I'd say ADC, a lot of the ADC role is kind of like very compressed at the moment. There are some outliers, but not even to like the extent where they're so egregious that it's really like oppressive to play against them. MF is gonna lead off the A tier, so once again can go like lethality variants, can abuse Collector quite nicely, can go IE if you're looking to go like crit variations, but both work quite nicely. Grudge being buffed in 14.12 would be very beneficial to this champion, but for the moment she is a solid A tier pick. One of the easiest champions to play in the game, has great setup, very solid pick in the A tier. Ashe is also going to, actually no, I'm not going to put Ashe here, I'm going to put Twitch here. Twitch is also going to be my A tier, so Twitch is a very solid pick for, he's still decent early game. That is something that they tried to go after because this champion was deceptively strong here. Obviously still spikes really nicely on your Bork, Runans, IE, trio of items, gives him a huge amount of AoE damage, really synergistic with Bork, this champion. His R is an incredibly powerful team fighting tool, and there's just lots of value to this pick. He has lots of good combos, but he's not quite as strong as some of the S tier options. But yeah, still a very solid pick. Bit shorter range, obviously, if you don't have access to ult. That ability is very valuable to you. Moving down from the S tier, we have Caitlyn. So Caitlyn got nerfed pretty heavily this patch. I believe she was going to lose a bit more power. I kind of assumed that more people would just start moving over to the attack speed variant builds, and that would like deflate her win rate. Most people stuck with the crit variations, which was cracked, like your IE, your Collector IE variations are still by far and away better. It would have been like misleading to go something like Kraken. That item is not good on Caitlyn. Attack speed boots are now preferable. This pick now benefits obviously more from attack speed. I wouldn't be surprised if they go after more of her damage and like try and push her more towards building attack speed again. But for the moment, she sits within the A tier. Still supports a very high ban rate within the West, not so much in the East. But yeah, solid pick nonetheless. Moving on to the S tier, we have a couple of champions here. So Brand is still a very good mage within the bot lane, very easy to play, very synergistic with the likes of Nami, can really work quite well in that pairing. That pairing will actually inflate his win rate, once again akin to Lucian. This pick will benefit indirectly when Nami is buffed. But Brand as a standalone, very good champion at the moment, a 4-way flex, yeah, really good, great pickup, and I would really recommend him if you're looking looking for a really solid flex option. Within the S tier, we're also going to have Swain. Actually, I'm going to swap Swain down to the A tier. There are lots of champs which are deserving of S tier spots, and Swain is probably one of the lesser ones at the moment. Swain definitely lost a, isn't less powerful, but like there are lots of champions which kind of like push him out of lane early on when he doesn't have access to like his level 6, level 9. Those obviously do come in a bit later. XP being more accessible within the bot lane does help him. He really does value these spikes quite a bit. Your builds still tend to be things like Blackfire. You still really value Rylai, Leandri, Zonya. You can go Malignant's item is also really solid on you, especially if you want to like rotate a lot of ultimates within fights. He's still a great frontline AP mage option. Yeah, really solid A tier pick. The other champs which are going to be within the S tier, so I'm actually missing Xayah. Xayah should be in the C tier. Xayah's actually pretty bad at the moment. I'm surprised I missed that one. But yeah, Xayah underperforming with the current items. Really valued lethal tempo and Halo Blades, which got nerfed, so she lost both like of her core keystones. She's kind of like missing a really solid option at the moment. They were going to buff her in 14.12. They haven't. She belongs within the C tier at the moment. But yeah, moving back to the S tier, Jhin got nerfed. He was in my S plus tier. He is now down in the S tier. Collector IE were his two core items. They're weaker. He's slightly weaker. Now an S tier pick. Still great setup, still does decent damage, simplistic to play, great synergies if you are able to continuously land your W and your Rs. Jinx is actually going to be with my S+, so Jinx is going to maintain her spot here. She is still in a really good spot. Obviously, the nerfs weren't enough, like Collector, IE, and her AD growth got nerfed. She's very low, like she's very close to the S tier, but yeah, not quite there yet. She's still in an amazing spot. Her and Ashe actually probably lead the way in terms of like the two marksmen at the moment. Both are relatively simplistic to play. Both have great amounts of damage. Obviously, Ashe is a bit more util focused. Jinx is a bit more snowballing focused. But yeah, these two picks are very deserving of S+ spots. And then Karthus and Seraphine are going to drop down to the S. Well, I mean, Seraphine's going to move up to the S tier. Karthus is going to move down to the S tier. Karthus got nerfed. He's no longer as strong, but he can still output a huge amount of damage. Obviously, bot lane tends to be his best role. Still very deserving of a spot here. In Seraphine's case, she's really risen up over recent patches. I mentioned this in my like tier list rundown, which I did on the community section of YouTube, I believe. The aspect ratio of the picture's messed up, so it looks pretty bad, but Seraphine, I moved up. This champion's performing a lot better with some of the changes which came her way. I had Ashe and Jinx in the S tier as like waiting to see kind of like how the other marksmen were affected, whether we saw some builds kind of break through. Nothing really came to be, so these two champions are now moving up into my S+ tier. Ashe is obviously being nerfed. Jinx still in a really strong spot. Probably the marksman I'd recommend the most to go to at the moment. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Once again, if you're looking for great AP damage options, Karthus, Brand. If you're looking for great snowballing potential, Jinx. If you're looking for a bit more util, Ashe and Jhin are great within this space. And Seraphine, also really nice if you're looking for a bit more AP util. Those are the picks I'd really recommend going to this patch. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.